Hi, thank you for tuning into another episode of Fireside Streams. I'm Pooja Khandelwal, Content Strategy Manager at Fashion Snoops, and joining me today are two extraordinary people who have revolutionized furniture design, Alice and Gavin Munro. They are the co-directors of Full Grown, an innovative furniture company that biofactures, growing objects like chairs, tables, and lamps from trees. At the cutting edge of this emerging art form and with nature as their ultimate collaborator, Alice and Gavin create symbiotic abundance. I am beyond thrilled to be chatting with you. Welcome to our Fireside Streams, Gavin and Alice.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pooja. It's lovely to be here. Yeah.
Thanks for your kind words.
You have been a huge inspiration for us. We even have you as our key influencers for one of our Spring Summer 23 cultural sentiments, Raw. And to tell you and our audience a little bit about Raw, Raw speaks about rethinking capitalism through a lens of human needs. So it all started with the pandemic and how it dislodged our trajectory and created this sort of necessary pause that pushed us to reconsider everything from global systems down to personal shift on an individual level. And add to that speed and chaos of modern life, we have consumers yearning for a return to what's natural, raw, and ancestral. They are leaning in to know the root of things and to strip away all that is not necessary, sort of trying to achieve an intimate relationship with all their belongings. This is where Full Grown comes in, and it hits on all these points so accurately, rethinking the way we see our everyday objects. So, with that said, could you please tell us about the mission of what you're trying to accomplish and the work that you're doing?
Well, the mission's quite a big one. It's certainly multi-generational. I mean, in essence, we can see two futures. And the second one has a party celebrating 1,000 years of peace, and we're here to, if nothing else, make some of the objects for that party, and head down that road. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So we're a decade into a 1,000-year plan.
So, what inspired you to? I'm sorry, you were saying something, Alice.
I said, oh, that sounds so quick if you say it that way, the 10 years into a 1,000-year plan. Yeah, I think let's go to what inspired you, Gavin. I think it's...
Well, yeah, it's kind of, to some degree, inspired by, I spent a childhood in hospital, in and out, and that, you know, so I had a lot of time to kind of soak things up. And especially one of the hospitals I was in had a ward that actually was was built into the woodland, and the wards were like sort of stripes that go into the forest. So it was really nice. And from my hospital bed, I could see out into the woods, and I could see the birds and badgers and foxes, and on the other side there was all the nursing staff and the hospital team who just kind of, they were kind, considerate, and competent in a way that absolutely blew me away. I was really, really impressed. And whatever kind of came next when I became an adult, I wanted to be like them, you know, but doing my thing rather than obviously being a nurse. But, you know, taking that on board and taking that kindness and moving somewhere else with it. So in essence, it's kind of inspired by gratitude, and combined with sort of studying materials. When I went to art college, and then studied design at university, and yeah, one of the things we studied was a thing called cradle to grave analysis, which it's now kind of cradle to cradle, kind of looking at the whole process. For a Coke can was the project we did. So what does it take to get all the materials together? What is it, and who is doing that? Who's kind of, you know, are there children in the mines mining the ore? Where are the dye coming from? Who's growing the sugar? You know, how do all these things come together? then how is the kind of item used, and then what happens after it. And by studying that, it became really obvious how wasteful and kind of insane things have become, really. So yeah, the sort of combination of these two things, and wanting to yeah, be grateful and give something back.
So when did Alice join you, and what drew you, Alice, to this company from your perspective? How did
well, so Gavin and I knew each other as friends long before we became a couple, and I guess that I've been in the background since Gavin started growing. He's been thinking about it for a long time, and then he started growing in about 2006, and then I guess so that was always sort of outside paid work time. But in 2012, we got married the year before, and I had quite a good job at the time. So I said, I think it's time that you just spent time just actually working on your dream. So I guess that I've been involved in the background for quite a long time, and then that, the earning the daily bread money, that was quite important as well. So and then I've had a lot of other jobs along the side, and so I've just been working, doing all sorts of other things within supply chain or export or teaching or quite a lot of other things, but nearly everything has contributed to my knowledge and to help with this project. So yeah, I guess that's not a very complete answer, but it's some of the answer for you.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Of sort of making things, and Alice has provided the kind of the business sense, which is wonderful.
Yeah, really. two very, very important things to make, any brand run. So that's amazing how you guys come together. You often emphasize how one must make least possible intervention with nature in order to get the things that we want. So can you elaborate a little on that thought process, and how and why is it crucial?
Well, so after the kind of the story of the Coke can, and realizing, once you start looking at the things that we do to make the products we have, or the items that we have, then it's a kind of we start realizing almost everything that humans do is wasteful, and so often, in order to get something, we make an awful lot of damage all along the way to the environment, to the people that are working, the whole thing. And it seemed like if we are going to stand a chance of a good life for everybody, or as many people as possible, then the only way, this kind of looking at nature like it's ours to do what we want with is clearly not going to work. So it's just sort of seemed like the logical conclusion that the best thing to do is interact as subtly as possible, and maybe even be beneficial if possible. It's hard to tell, but yeah, treading lightly seems to be the sensible thing to do. And once you go down that road, then it all starts to seem, well as difficult, really rather beautiful.
Yeah.
So with full, sorry, go ahead, Alice. Sorry.
Even the methodologies that we've been employing have really changed, even in the last few years. I mean, we've been trying to make a place for nature and for wildlife, but that's even accelerated over the last couple of years, and it seems to have made a difference in lots of ways which we can't even perceive yet. That's one of the things, is the lead time for making a decision and seeing the result is quite a long process as well, isn't it?
It's a really long process, but it's kind of we started out with the idea of a kind of an outdoor factory, or a kind of a sort of furniture vineyard, with everything in neat rows and what have you, and actually over the sort of 15 years it's become apparent that actually we're sort of it's more like an organized woodland that emits art and furniture and what have you, rather than a kind of factory that works for us. If we're we're nice to this little ecosystem, then we can things will happen.
Hopefully reap rewards.
I love that. I love the terminology, organized woodland. So, with full grown, how much intervention goes in, like it, and how much of it is simply nature working its magic? Like if you had to, I don't think you can quantify it, but if you had to just put it in simple
Well, if
definition.
we could quantify it, nature doesn't naturally grow chairs, that's for sure. But as we've gone along, we've realized that that actually it doesn't, the things that we do to the trees in order to make our objects are all replications of things that happen in nature already. So when branches bend and during storms and things like that, and how it's an observation of what happens to a trees anyway, and then kind of letting those using those ideas, but doing it gently and carefully. So instead of a branch breaking in a storm, we can kind of bend it gently and hold it. And so everything that we're doing is really, these trees are really well cared for. They're not going to sort of it's not going to work unless you really, essentially it starts with looking after the healthy soil. That's the thing. But so yes, there's an awful lot of intervention, but the trick seems to be, and we're a while away yet, but to do as little as possible at the right moment. But we're still learning when that is.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of steps that have been taken, but actually maybe we've taken 30 steps, and we maybe only need to take 10 steps, but actually it's learning when those steps are. So it's still an experiment, really. It's
a funny combination of really simple and outrageously complicated,
and very patient, but also trying to do it at the right time as well. So it's we still don't know what we don't know. It's one of those.
No, collaborating with nature in a reciprocal way, the way Full Grown does, is obviously not as easy as it sounds. It kind of segues into my next question that I wanted to ask you, that there definitely has got to be a learning curve, and not to mention the patience, the surrendering and conscious understanding that goes in. So I think you've already touched upon a few challenges that you faced. What would you say were your top learnings from it?
Hold on, I've written this down here. The challenges, we haven't got time for all the challenges. It takes the 10 years, but where are we? So one of them is one of the challenges is time. It's at the beginning I thought that it would take 2 or 3 years for an action that we do to a tree to take effect, and for us to truly know what we did that day 3 years ago. But actually something, after 3 years something will happen, and after 4 or 5 years something else changes. And it's only when you start looking closely you can see how much trees move around and how much activity there really is. I don't think there's been much need to look that closely at trees before. But time it's really difficult, knowing that what you do today, it's still going to be 6 years before that day takes effect, if you see what I mean. And that's quite hard on your head. But it is what it is. There's
the differences between the species as well. So so we learn a rule which might work brilliantly for willow and maybe something else, but it might just not work for hazel or apple. So it's sort of making a rule, understanding a rule, deciding a rule, confirming a rule, and then all of your confirmation bias is shattered. We've no idea what happens here. So we're learning things and learning things and learning things. Which we don't.
It's a process.
Yeah, it's definitely a process.
Didn't know we were going to learn those things, but here we are. We've
Yeah.
learned some more of those things.
That's the nature of pioneering, really, isn't it? I suppose. I mean, there's definitely the sort of fact that nature gives and nature takes away. That is for sure. You know, our first a third of our first planting of trees was ash, and there's been an ash dieback, a big disease that's come through all of Europe.
Yeah, call it tree COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a definite wonderful generosity to nature and a wonderful harsh cruelty that the more you look at it, the more you're kind of aware, and respect seems to be the thing.
Yep, I was going to say the same thing. There's really that respect going in. And that also goes back to, Gavin, you mentioned about it coming in from this feeling of gratitude. And I think that kind of goes stronger as you are connecting with nature more and more and understanding that sort of a, give and take.
Yeah, it definitely seems to work if you've got the right attitude that day, for sure. It's nice, and it's definitely, I mean, on that level, it's completely being rewarded, because we have birds living in the chairs and the lamps as they grow and what have you, and we've got a kind of, a sort of, there's several generations of birds that have grown, living in a chair orchard. It's wonderful, so yeah, there's definitely some really nice things to that as well,
and keeping that sense of wonder as well as that sense of gratitude as
well, I think
is really important.
It does make communication quite hard, though, because I think the things that we've seen over the last 15 years are there's some really, really beautiful things that it's hard to express to people, without being there and experiencing it, communicating what we've learned or communicating in general on a personal level. But if I could think in words, I wouldn't be shaping trees, really. That's the problem. But anyway, that's another story.
But like, going back to what you mentioned about, generations of birds have grown in these orchards, and it just adds so much more meaning to the products from a consumer standpoint, that when you're going in and getting this chair or a table or a lamp, there's so much more. It's not just something that, okay, there was a tree and then you cut it down and then you build it. That this has more to it, way more to it. And I think that's beautiful. And that kind of takes me to my next question. So as I mentioned, since the pandemic, we are seeing a shift in consumers' mindset from relying on factory-produced goods to becoming more self-reliant and wanting to understand the grassroots of things. So have you witnessed this change in the consumer's mindset in the last few years? And has there been a significant increase in the demand or in general interest towards full-grown products?
Yeah.
I mean, we're overwhelmed by inquiries non-stop.
Yeah, we've got so many opportunities, and I definitely have noticed more interest in seeing responses to the natural world. And I think that's one of the things. There are so many opportunities that now we're very excited about, potentially being able to work with universities and foundations and looking for representation and galleries and things. And it's just, how can we actually make the most of these opportunities and give the most back to the rest of the world, and because this technology could be amazing wherever trees can grow. It could have really far-reaching consequences, but we've just got to sort of make sure that we can make the most of all of this very exciting area that we haven't quite fathomed the capabilities of, really, I suppose.
But it definitely does seem there's been a big kind of an upturn in interest in sort of natural warmth, as it were, and natural kind of coziness, and I don't know, a sort of, not sure how to describe it.
Really. Biophilic design.
Yes, biophilic is the word.
So many of these things that we've been talking about for years, which we just feel like we've spoken about too much, and that we're a bit blue in the face, but suddenly it's become part of the mainstream conversation, and biophilic design and house plants and things which have seemed a little bit niche. Now everybody's talking about how can we make our worlds feel a bit more natural, how can we accept that we are part of nature, not just separate from nature.
That does seem to be the thing, this idea that that we're a part of things, not at the top of a hierarchy, seems to be more and more kind of accepted and encouraged, and I couldn't be happier about that, let's face it.
So how far do you think we are from implementing this technology on a global scale? And given the cost and rarity, not a lot of people can experience this. By when do you think it could be made available to the mass?
Well, we definitely see the problems that William Morris had, and in order to do this at the beginning, like with every technology, with cars and computers, at the very beginning, books, it's incredibly expensive, and really, because for every chair or piece of art that we grow, there was 50 other abandoned things. It took a lot to get to that one, if you know what I mean. So I think realistically speaking, it's kind of 2 or 3 decades away from being, a standard manufacturing procedure. But at the same time, in the scheme of things, that's not very long in the scheme of humanity. So I think that's the kind of fastest that it can be. But then there's also, we've had a lot of interest in people wanting to do this as a like an online course or learning how to do this, and in which case, there's a possibility people could grow their own chairs within merely a decade.
That's actually reaffirming. I mean, 2 to 3 decades it's not a long time at all. I think it's nice. It's good to know that. So do you also see this being applied in other industries? I mean, I know your main area of focus is furniture, but what about any other type of industries? Could you share an example or two of where this could be applied?
Well, there's an amazing scientist called Ferdinand Ludwig, who's developing, we can send you links afterwards and things, who's a...
I'd love that.
Oh, he's brilliant. We've met him a couple of times. He's growing buildings. It's a whole new level, once you start thinking about chairs, that's one thing, or what have you, but buildings, next level. So that's quite exciting. And
a colleague of his is also looking into the living root bridges in Meghalaya in India. And so Wilfred Middleton is looking into this. So there are so many similar disciplines that could have the potential to really revolutionize what's going on. Diana Scherer in the Netherlands, she does this really beautiful stuff with roots, but smaller roots than the living root bridges. And all
I'm really envious of how quickly she can grow things.
Yeah, the potential for all this mycelium and slime mold, and there are so many brilliant potential projects, and we're just a small corner of one small part of it. But and
there's a sort of a greater desire to, as far as I can tell, for kind of inclusion, consideration, and consent, and these things kind of added together when you're thinking about making things or doing things, seem to be more and more popular and more desirable. You know what I mean? That people have been considerate and are thinking about the whole process of the whole consequences of their actions, rather than just getting the materials and making a thing. And it seems like we're sort of a small part of a much bigger movement, and it's really nice, actually.
I've been noticing that lamp behind you, and I think it's gorgeous. And I can only imagine the feelings and emotions that people might have when they actually see their finished products after waiting for 5 or 6 or 10 years, So could you tell us a little bit about their reaction?
Well, I'm gonna have you're gonna have to ask again in another few years. We had an early lamp harvest, and a couple of prototype chairs have gone to private collectors and museums. But in terms of actually delivering chairs, we're still 2 or 3 years away at best. So yeah, you're going to have to come back to us, and
we've got some brilliant, really patient, wonderful. I mean, we have to see them as patrons at the minute, because at the minute they're just waiting for their items to arrive. So
yeah, it's
some really, really just far-sighted, intelligent people who recognize that it takes a bit of time to develop a new technology.
Yeah, we're very much learning about delayed gratification and the challenges of that. So yeah, ask us again in 3 years.
Will do. Yep, definitely. So right now, could you tell us what are the different product types that you are working with?
Well, I have to admit, at the beginning, I thought this would take a decade. And at the end of that decade, we'd have the designs for chairs, tables, lamps, the whole, all sorts of different things. But working with nature, working with trees, they go at their own pace. And so we're having a bit of a moment of this is one of the beauties isn't the right word, but one of the kind of opportunities of COVID is, we're not running around everywhere doing exhibitions. We've managed to kind of, this summer has been the first time in a decade we've actually managed to slow down and have a think. And because this project is a mix of, of various different, of design, of horticulture, of science, but especially art, it seems like actually now's the time to let's just have a stop, slow down, think about what we're doing, and look at it through a sort of different lenses. And how you asked earlier about how long it might take before this is a regular process, and that's 2 or 3 decades from here. So actually from the beginning of our project and the beginning of other people thinking about it, it's going to take, it will have been 40-50 years by the point it's really going. So yeah, we're gonna sort of,
we've grown some lamps and we've grown some chandeliers, but probably we might have a little pause on the lighting.
Yeah, we're going to focus on chairs, because that's such an iconic, it's something that you interact with, you know what I mean? But we're going to, for the next few years, think about it, look at the orchard as a piece of art itself, and looking at it through those lenses. I think we can learn a lot more, rather than trying to desperately make it into a factory. It's like the woodland has said, oh no, this is not a factory.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you, so there's what we need to do now, or what we're going to do, is spend a little bit more time, I don't know, interacting with the trees, observing, wow, other than you're going to such and such person. It's like looking at them in their own right. And
can I interject?
Yeah, considering like a herd rather than a...
Yeah. So at the beginning, when Gavin was setting it all out, he was seeing it as a manufacturing process. So the first few years, it was rows, and you're all going to be the same thing. You're all chairs, you're all lamps, you're all tables. And then he met an artist hero of his who said, actually, what you're doing isn't manufacturing, it's much more like art. And then suddenly it seemed like the burden
spiritual.
So then he came and looked at the orchard in a whole different light, and looked at each tree and was like, oh, you look like you're going to be a chair, you look like you're going to be a lamp. Oh, you want to change? That's okay. It's difficult for inventory, but it's really, really good to see the shapes of the trees themselves and see which forms they most resemble. So that's been a huge part of the change and understanding more. So yeah, it's a different discipline, but actually seeing it in a different way has really
it's really helped, actually. What we were talking a little bit earlier about, the kind of you know, how trees don't naturally grow into chairs, as it were, but they do, you know, coppice trees do naturally. Oh, and that's one of the important things, actually. The trees that we use, they can all be cut down in the winter, and new shoots grow back. You know, so we're not killing the tree when we harvest them. It's more like a haircut. But so what we do is we coppice in the winter, we cut them down, and then in the spring and early summer, they start, you know, they grow and, you know, how they want to at the beginning. And what we do is we look for those through those patterns, and so the trees that are already growing in the kind of pattern that you need for a chair, then great, you know, you can be a chair. And sometimes they grow in, you know, they have 4 shoots from the main base or 3, and that's going to be more like a, you know, a sculpture or something out, you know, a table or something. So it really is about looking closer to what the tree's already doing and then changing that as little as possible. And, you know, by doing that, it's kind of, they tend to be quicker and healthier, and
require less intervention.
And requiring less intervention. So there's a lot of kind of, I mean, it sounds really off the wall, but listening to the trees, man.
I think it's beautiful. I think you take this to another level. I mean, there is this thing about having relationship with nature. Let's just pick trees, you know, having a relationship with trees. But what you're saying is having an individual connection with individual tree, really understanding, because, you know, just like one human is different from another, of course, a tree is different, even if they're like, you know, one apple tree compared with the other apple tree. I think that's beautiful. And I definitely want to talk to you again in a couple of years and see how this relationship has gone forward with you and what your learning has been. I feel there's a lot of spiritual connection in here. It's just amazing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's hard to communicate. So thank you for putting it into words. It's it's one of those things that sort of
too beautiful not to do.
It's too beautiful not to do. That's the point.
Yeah, and it's too beautiful to even put it into words sometimes. I totally understand that.
If I could have put it into words, I wouldn't be doing it. But,
well, Full Grown is an ultimate sustainable brand that shows us how we can foster an intimate reciprocal relationship with nature and also just trees on an individual level and become self-reliant. And what you guys are doing is simply mind-blowing and also very, very necessary. So thank you so much for doing what you do. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It has been a very inspiring conversation.
Well,
thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you. Thanks again. Speak in a few years.
Yeah.